Sounds good.
All right, so at this point we are recording. So in terms of an introduction to the applications themselves, typically when an institution comes to us with questions about both Lockdown Browser and Monitor, they are looking to address a number of items. First and foremost, certainly the institution might have a concern about digital cheating. There are concerns about students accessing external resources, and really how to go about best protecting not only the exam content, but because I guess there are two different things that you're looking at. Making sure the test doesn't get out in the wild, but then also many faculty publish their content, so it's also making sure that there's a way to restrict where that content ends up ultimately. Student identity, certainly when you're looking at testing remotely in that purely distance environment, that's a big concern. I think everyone has stories or that they have heard from other institutions about a person being enrolled in a course, but yet somebody else is taking the assessment for that person using their login credentials. But also, there's a little bit of a struggle between flexibility and convenience. Many institutions, with their online courses, it's this idea of if you are struggling with space issues within your bricks and mortar environment, there needs to be a way to be more flexible. Instead of having instructors take time out of their instruction in a classroom environment to give assessments in that manner. Also, there's a little bit of pushback on the student side. So when students now are enrolled in online courses, they tend to push back about coming to a bricks and mortar environment to take an assessment itself, because that doesn't truly feel like an online course to them. So Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor, in combination with your learning management system, it's a great way really to provide a flexible solution that offers that academic integrity for your institution, but also flexibility for your students. Lockdown Browser is the base layer application. It is a custom browser. It's installed in addition to any other browser that your students are using. The goal with Lockdown Browser is to add security to those online assessments and really to make sure that the academic integrity portion is nailed down for the institution. So it will prevent students from engaging in activities that normally would allow them to copy, print, or paste any of their content. So it's going to limit the file edit menu bar and what features are available to the student. It will also prevent the student from using applications that they might try to use to capture any screen content. It will prevent the student from navigating to other websites. There are a couple exceptions to the rule, and we certainly will cover that in this session. And it will also prevent students from accessing other applications such as instant messengers or really any other type of browser, for example, during the session. Now, Lockdown Browser from the instructor's perspective, it is an application that the instructor applies the settings for on a case-by-case basis. The integration component with Moodle is an LTI or a block, depending on the version that you're using for Moodle. But with Moodle, at this point, all of our all of our institutions have access to auto launch capability, which means the student does not access Lockdown Browser from their desktop or from a program applications folder. It is done within the learning management system itself. When they navigate to the quiz, they will have to install Lockdown Browser once, but then from that point forward, they'll have the ability to take advantage of auto launch, which means that the student clicks on the assessment and it opens up within the framework of Lockdown Browser and or Monitor. Now, in terms of the instructor perspective, I do want to take you into my instance of Moodle. And I've already logged in with my instructor level credentials, so I'm logged in as Anna. The course that I have rights to is Geography 101. And then in terms of the course itself, it's just a matter of navigating to the dashboard, because my integration has already been set up, and then accessing the option for Lockdown Browser. Now, the very first thing that your faculty or your team will have access to is this welcome screen. Now, the welcome screen itself has access to video tutorials for the application. They are all LMS specific. And there are a number of resources that are also embedded here. So things like a course syllabus. Now, with a course syllabus itself, the syllabus is specific to the application that you're using. So if you're only using Lockdown Browser, you'd be using this syllabus. If you're using Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor, you have access to one that's a little bit more in depth. It gives a little bit more information about best practices when you're testing online. So instructors can come in, they can customize this as they see fit, and then push it out to the student. They can either email it, they can certainly put it in their course if they like, but this is just to help them get started with the application so they don't have to be too concerned about how do I communicate what LockDown browser and what monitor is to the student themselves. Now, the last link for resources will point you back in the direction of Respondus and also to some static guides. So there's some static quick start guides here that the instructor can pick up if they prefer to print something, keep it next to their desk while they're adding their requirements. Most faculty, even if they do print out this guide, they might look at it once, but from that point forward, it's pretty self-explanatory. They get the hang of it, and it's done much more quickly each and every time it's used. But once you've walked through resources, you can continue along to LockDown Browser, and this will take you into the LockDown Browser dashboard. Now, the dashboard itself is going to pull a list of all the quizzes that the instructor has available for use inside their instance of Moodle in their course. So in my situation, I have a list for quizzes, I have a column for LockDown Browser, and a column for Respondus Monitor. I'm actually going to turn the settings off here and use this quiz because there are some items in here that I do want to show you. So for my purposes, we're going to work with this week 1 quiz. Now, once I've selected the quiz I want to work with, I click on the drop-down, click on the option for settings, and then I can add my requirements. So my first step is to add my LockDown Browser requirements. And I have some advanced settings that are available for me here. We'll uncheck these boxes and talk about these first. I can choose to lock the student into the browser till the exam is complete. I can allow students to take an assessment with an iPad using LockDown Browser. In your instance, do you envision students using iPads? Is that something that is supported there at the institution?
Sorry, I had to unmute there.
That's okay.
We don't use it at the moment, but it would be nice to have for sure moving forward, just in case that's the only option for the student.
Okay, so in terms of generally speaking, so if you want to use it with LockDown Browser with Windows and Mac devices, you wouldn't be required to check this box. But some faculty might have an aversion to using it. Other faculty might say, I'm perfectly fine with students using it. I see a lot of nursing departments using it for clinicals and the like. So if that's something that you anticipate faculty will want to use, they simply check this box. But then this explain link takes faculty to more information on the application. So if you think you might have faculty using it, I always would suggest that the IT team walk through the links that are embedded here because this will give you more information on how the product works from the iPad perspective. This first link takes you to a knowledge-based article, and this will walk you through step by step the navigation path we took to get to the dashboard. But then directly below, there's a student-facing article, and this just gives more information on students on how to install it, where to go to get the app itself, and really then gives a screen-by-screen tutorial for students if they're using the iPad. So again, if you're planning to use this or faculty are allowing the use of the iPad, I would make sure that this link is embedded somewhere in their course syllabus so students can really take a closer look at what that experience is like from the student perspective. Now, coming back to the dashboard itself, I can also allow access to specific external web domains, and this is basically allowing me to, excuse me, to link to ebooks, web-based ebooks. So if that's something the team is interested in doing, you'd simply add the domain root URLs here and then separate them out by comma. You would need to make sure that that's also done in the assessment itself because that's how LockDown Browser knows how to whitelist the application. If I wanted to enable the use of the calculator on the toolbar, I can either select the use of a standard calculator or a scientific calculator. And then you also have the ability to enable printing from the toolbar.
Is the toolbar the software toolbar, or is that the Windows toolbar?
It's the LockDown Browser toolbar.
Okay.
And actually, when we walk through from the student side, you'll be able to see exactly what that looks like.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Now, setting the requirements for LockDown Browser, usually from the instructor perspective, only takes about 20 seconds from the time they open up the dashboard. They simply add the requirement and then walk through a couple of additional settings and click Save and Close. If you are adding the use of Respondus Monitor, once Monitor is enabled at the server level and those 3 columns appear, you can simply just continue along and add the requirements for Monitor. There are a couple of really nice options for you available. So the default is not to use it because many institutions are only using LockDown Browser, say in testing centers or proctor types of situations. But if you wanted to add the requirement, you have 2 great options. The either or option allows you the opportunity to let the student decide what method they are most comfortable with. So if I select this option, or rather regardless of the option that I select, this box populates for the instructor. This can be customized, and from your perspective, you can point the instructor to a specific contact. You can make sure they have access to specific resources. This is just a way for you to communicate what Monitor is, who's using it. Perhaps some institutions might even put something here that explains that LockDown Browser and Monitor are being piloted. If they would like to participate in the pilot, they should reach out to XYZ. But the either or option itself, once this is enabled, the instructor needs to add an exam password here and then provide it to the proctor in any proctored setting, because this password is going to be entered into the device in those proctored types of settings to turn off the requirement for Monitor so that it becomes a LockDown Browser only assessment. And that's, again, if you're using that either or and giving the student the option to decide. Now, if you prefer that every student uses LockDown Browser and Respondus Monitor, you would select the middle option. There is no password then at that point required. And then you'll be working with the startup sequence. And the startup sequence is a series of optional events that have to occur before the assessment is provided, before the student actually enters the assessment. So you'll notice that several of these are grayed out. The webcam check is grayed out because the student must have a working webcam in order to use the application. Facial detection is also grayed out, and we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the remainder of these options can be unchecked by the instructor if they choose. So in this instance, additional instructions, there's an edit text field, and this really speaks to the do's and don'ts during the assessment. During the exam, you shouldn't access other resources. Please don't communicate with other people. Please stay in your seat, focus on the computer, and then what to do if there's an interruption. Now, from an institution perspective, you can leave this alone, and then faculty can come in and they can customize this as they see fit. If you prefer, you can actually customize the information at an administrative level. And if you bear with me a second, I can show you exactly what that looks like. And then you can lock it up so that your faculty do not alter the text. They just simply come in and they check the boxes that they prefer to use. So inside the administrative area, there's a settings area for Monitor. And this just mirrors the startup sequence within your instance of your learning management system. So here you can see these are the additional instructions. You can save and close it. You can lock the text, and then save the settings at the bottom of the page, and that will push out the message that you prefer for that particular area. Guidelines and tips. This simply is a series of 5 screens that walks through best practices when you're taking an assessment remotely and how to create a best practices video. So it just reminds the student that they should be in an area where their internet connection is strong, not to stream videos, for example, that might alter the strength of their connection. It talks a little bit about things like making sure that from a testing perspective that they are focused on taking their assessment, that they don't move around too much during the assessment itself. They shouldn't be wearing perhaps baseball caps with large brims or sunglasses if they're taking a video. It just would not give the clearest video. So it's just a series of tips, again, really meant to make sure that you have a best practices video being taken. The student photo, self-explanatory, is show ID. Some of our institutions do not have digital photos available for their student IDs for distance learning students. In those instances, it could be perhaps that you are allowing the student to use a library card or perhaps something like a BJ's wholesale card. And then as long as they have a photo and their name printed on it, that might be something you find acceptable. But that again is customizable, and that's something that can be altered here as well. for show ID. And again, you can lock that text and save it if you like. The environment check, this is also something that can be edited, and I typically find that this might be edited based on the type of assessment that might be given. So for example, if it's a low stakes type of assessment, you might be comfortable with just a quick view of the desktop. If perhaps it's close to certification or mirrors some type of a certification environment, you might be a little bit more specific about the placement of the webcam, and you may require that the student use an external webcam. This facial detection option is left grayed out because as is, the requirement is set that the student must pass a facial detection check before they're allowed access to the assessment itself. But you'll notice here there are a couple of different options that you can enable as well or disable. So,
and I just have a quick question. Sorry to interrupt you. You mentioned that we might want to require a student to have a external webcam. What kind of difference does that make with the software?
Sure. It really depends on the type of environment check that you're looking to provide. So, for example, some of my nursing programs might use an external webcam because they want to see everything in that student's environment, a 360 view of the room. They may want to see the ceiling, underneath the desk. They may have very serious concerns about students using notes, for example, that are affixed to their monitor. So they may require that they show even the monitor itself. So from that perspective, it's not really altering, it's not altering the technology. It's just giving the instructor more information so that they feel more comfortable with the assessment itself.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Some institutions, and it's usually, again, those certification types of assessments, people tend to really want to mirror as closely as what the student would actually be experiencing when they're taking the assessment in a certification environment.
Got it, thank you.
Sure. So the next option, notify students during the exam if face cannot be detected. This is just a prompt the student would receive if they move out of frame. And it would just gently remind the student that they need to get back in the frame so they can have a good quality video for processing. Now, once you've completed your options, just a matter of clicking save and close. Usually takes me about maybe 5 minutes to walk through those pieces, but most faculty will spend no more than a minute to a minute and a half within that area adding the requirements. If you've done some of the customization work for them, it has a tendency to be even quicker, maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds. And usually when they're first auditing the videos, the first couple of times, you might see a minute to a minute and a half. And then from that point forward, they're comfortable with it. They understand how it works. And the time they spend in that panel is less and less. Now, once the assessment's already been given, you would simply come back to the assessment itself and then select the option for class results. And my apologies, we just transitioned to this auto launch piece here for account manager, so I do need to show you and show it to you in a different LMS. The results will be exactly the same. I'm just a little bit more limited with what I have access to in this course. But I can show it to you here. The user interface for all of our applications is exactly the same. So once I actually open this up, this is exactly how it will populate for you within your environment. So this is referred to as the course dashboard, and this will allow you the ability to see all of the students that are enrolled in this particular course, and it will give you information on this particular assessment for those students. You'll notice here, in addition to the students' names, there's a review priority area, and this speaks to our review priority system. And the review priority system is actually looking at all the infractions that were collected for the student, and it is providing you with a more limited number of videos, if you will, that you'll be reviewing. This application is meant to be a deterrent. So in terms of adding security, it's just one more step within that security process for you when you're testing remotely. Now, the review priority system, you can see here, it's populating from high, medium to low. So it may be that if you, in a class of 50 students or 100 students, you're getting a sampling of videos that are noted as high. And that's really directing your faculty to taking a closer look at something that might score in that range rather than having to review each and every video. You'll notice here that the date is populating, so we'll give you some information about when the student took the assessment. also the score for the assessment and the duration of the assessment itself. Often faculty are looking at the videos themselves, and they may look at the date, the time. They may see the two students took an assessment pretty close together. They may see the scores are very close together. This might look very, very unusual, for example, if this is a midterm versus a quiz. So faculty, I think, are looking at all the different pieces and making a decision about whether or not they need to take a closer look at any one particular video. If you do decide that you want to take a closer look, you simply click on the plus next to the student's name. And I should mention that the requirement for Flash, this is actually going away by December 31st. So that's something that as of December 31st will not be used. Just opening up that video. Now, in terms of the video itself, you can see here that once the video opens up, it's giving you a large video box. In the top right-hand corner, it's giving you really just a summary of those infractions. But then directly below, you have access to date timestamps. And this will allow you the ability to just simply fast forward to any of the infractions if you choose. Or if you prefer, you can simply come down to any of the red bars and scroll over to the infraction itself. Now, you'll notice that there are a couple of items listed here. There's missing from frame. And this really speaks to the facial detection pieces. So one is capturing whether or not the student is missing from the frame. Another is capturing whether or not there are multiple students in the frame. If there's a different person in the frame than the person who started the assessment. You also have a number of other options that you can certainly take a look at. So in looking at the video itself, the video records audio as well as video. And it is ambient audio that's being captured. Directly below the large video box, you can see here, there are a number of items that are being recorded. So this speaks to the pieces that we enabled for use with this particular assessment. So if I wanted the student to take a photo, show an ID, walk through an environment video, there's a pre-exam thumbnail, and this just continues to record after the student completes their environment video. If I wanted to watch the video in its entirety, I could start with exam start, and I could watch the whole video. If I take a quick scan of the thumbnails below, and these are all randomly generated, I could simply click on them and watch from that point forward. So in a nutshell, the instructors can watch as much or as little of the video as they feel is required. Now, I keep referring to instructors watching video and adding requirements. If you have a team, perhaps, that's auditing any of these videos on behalf of the instructor, most important thing I can tell you is from a privacy and security perspective, the only folks that have access to the video content itself would be the recognized contacts that your institution provides to us. And there are 3 authorized contacts. It will be an admin contact and 2 support contacts, or the instructor who has access to their course, because this information will be in their course. On the back side, the videos themselves are stored on Amazon Web Servers, on our Amazon Web Servers that are hosted through Amazon in the United States. The videos are stored for a period of 5 years, and that's typically the length of time it takes a student to matriculate through any program. But if you have any special requirements in terms of length of storage, please let us know before the first video is taken so that we can have all the videos set for the same time period.
Where are the videos hosted?
They're stored on our cloud servers that are hosted through Amazon Web Services in the United States.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Are there any questions for me on this portion of it?
Is there a way to adjust the sensitivity of a priority level? So can we set certain, I guess, variables or increments to indicate high, low, or medium, or is that all standard?
It's all standard, but there are a couple of items that I think to consider. So for example, with facial detection, a little bit of an exception to the rule is we require that the student pass a facial detection check before they have access to the assessment. If you decide that that might be too stringent a requirement, you would simply uncheck the boxes within facial detection. It can't be done at the higher level, but it is done at the lower level. And let me actually show you exactly what that refers to. So here, when I'm adding the requirements for a monitor, you can see there's a facial detection piece. If I uncheck this box, this was going to allow students to enter the assessment without passing facial detection. If I uncheck this box, this is not going to prompt the student if they move out of frame. So these are a little bit more, if you will, in terms of making sure, really the goal on our side is to provide you with the best quality video. And these have a tendency to point the student back in the right direction, but if you feel that that's too stringent, you can certainly uncheck those options.
Got it, thank you.
You're welcome. So in terms of the videos and also taking things back a little bit of a step, you had mentioned the webcam piece before. I have some institutions that are perfectly fine with student using the webcam that's embedded in their laptop, and that's not an issue for, say, 90% of their testing. When it comes to midterms or finals, they may make that requirement for the student to use an external webcam, but again, it really depends on the school and the type of program. I actually have some nursing programs that are even more stringent because they may request that the student place the webcam so that you can see the student's hands and their face in the frame at all times. So it really maybe sometimes comes down to the particular instructor, what their preferences are, or maybe the institution and the type of assessment that they're getting ready for. So in terms of the student's perspective, it is important to understand that there is that one-time installation for the application that is required, but in your particular environment, the student is installing it. They're basically navigating to Moodle, clicking on the option to install LockDown browser the first time. And once it's installed, what they have access to depends entirely on how the instructor sets up their assessment. So if your instructor is setting up the assessment so that the student is using both LockDown browser and monitor, that's what the student will be required to use. If the instructor is only using LockDown browser, they won't be able to use monitor with their assessment. They will only be able to use LockDown browser with their assessment. It is important to know that LockDown browser, there are two different installation files available for it. There's a BYOD that's installed to student devices that they own, but there's also a lab edition. So if you have areas within the institution where you plan to install LockDown browser, say in a managed environment, there's a different installation file that you would be using. It is called the lab edition. And that particular edition allows you to customize basically your updating schedule. So students will never be prompted to update in those environments. The application is Windows compatible, Mac compatible, and also iOS compatible. If a student tries to take an assessment without using the proper browser, they will be prompted with an error message letting them know that they must install LockDown browser. So they'll never be able to, for example, open up Internet Explorer and have access to an assessment that has the requirement for LockDown browser and monitor. It is something that they will be required to use your custom browser for. Now, I do want to take you into the student's perspective, and we'll take an assessment from their perspective. And I'm simply going to log in with my student level credentials. And then it's just a matter of either logging into my courses from here or here. My user interface is going to look slightly different because now I'm logging in as a student. You can see that my week 1 quiz has the requirement for LockDown browser and the webcam. In most instances, you'll be setting up your assessments for 1 attempt. But for my purposes, we do this pretty frequently, so we have this set up for multiple attempts. And you can see it's prompting me to close a number of applications. So things like Trillion, Skype. If I were running TeamViewer, which we use pretty frequently here, it would make me shut that down before I access my assessment. And now you'll notice the very first thing the student sees is this terms of use. So the first part is between Respondus and the student, and the next part is between your institution and the student. I have many institutions that will either include their own code of conduct here, or maybe perhaps if you have some sort of an LMS technology statement that you want to substitute in here or use, you're welcome to do so. Once the student agrees, hello, and I happen to be using an external webcam today. If I wanted to change my webcam, I could, but for my purposes, I'm simply recording both audio, video, making sure everything works properly. And the student does have an opportunity to watch all these pieces back before they start their assessment. So they might notice that they've done something they shouldn't be doing. Really recording both audio, video, making sure everything works properly. And then they can either re-record it or continue along. And this usually becomes important with the environment scan, because sometimes students realize, well, I probably shouldn't have had that piece of paper out, or maybe I had a phone out, and it could be very innocent, but it does give them an opportunity to make an adjustment before they actually start their assessment. My additional instructions are populating. Please don't access other resources, phone, tablets, notes. Please stay in your seat. These are the guidelines and tips that I have referenced. Avoid rooms where children or other people are present. Turn off TVs, radio, music. Run a system and network check. Please make sure people aren't streaming videos. And these might seem very simplistic, but sometimes students just simply forget. So it's just a reminder. Don't wear sunglasses, baseball caps, hats. Taking a photo. Providing an ID. And then walking through an environment check. So for me, I prefer to use the external webcam. I think it just gives a better view. But certainly you can use the camera embedded in your laptop. But for me, you can see I have a number of items out, simply that you wouldn't want the student to have out, but things like my password, business cards. But the student, if they assume that they have out, they can re-record it and make any adjustments that they might make. For me, I prefer to use the external webcam. I think it just gives a better view. But certainly you can use the camera embedded in your laptop. But for me, you can see I have a number of items out, simply that you wouldn't want the student to have out, but things like my password, business cards. So for me, I prefer to... I can continue along. You can see here, I've passed facial detection. It's pretty simple. Thumbs up. If I were to move out of frame, and then I'm allowed access to my assessment. But once the student launches their assessment, you can see here that the assessment opens up full screen. In the top left-hand corner, I have a strip-down toolbar. I happen to be running a BYOD edition. So here you can see I can check for a newer version. I can zoom my text. I have access to a symbols palette here, so this is particularly helpful with foreign language, math, science. This is a scientific calculator that I enabled. The top middle of the screen, there's no web URL address field. The top right, I can't exit this activity until it's completed. You'll notice that there's an icon on the top right-hand corner, so you can see that it's recording. It's letting me know. And also, my webcam is flashing green. There's no picture-in-picture. There's nothing out of the ordinary or unusual that might cause a student any kind of testing anxiety. You'll notice in the bottom right or bottom left, depending on how you normally would set up your own system application tray, mine has been completely covered over. So I can't access any other application at this point. You'll notice in the top middle of the screen, and actually a couple of things you can't see. Students they lose the ability to use all of their combination keystrokes, so they're not able to use their control, their function, or their alt keys. They can't use their tab keys. The right mouse click menu is also disabled. So really, from the student's perspective, the only thing they can do at this point is take the assessment. Now, from the faculty perspective,
question: what about the print screen function? Does that work?
It's disabled as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Now, from a faculty perspective, important to understand that faculty still have access to all of their LMS features and functionality. So we don't limit you or prevent you from using things like time testing, randomization of questions. LockDown Browser and Respondus Monitor work in addition to the LMS features and functionality. You'll notice as you're looking at the questions here, I have a number of different questions. I have some images that are embedded in the questions themselves. You'll see here, question 4 has a hyperlink that's embedded in it. And this was one of the exceptions to the rule that I had mentioned earlier. So for example, with LockDown Browser, and when you're using Respondus Monitor, this is opening up as a new tab, but every live link on this page has been disabled. Normally, you would never take a student to someplace like Google or Wikipedia, but again, you can do so knowing that it's extending the reach of your assessment. It's allowing you the ability to use things like diagrams, linking to PDFs, in some instances, audio clips or video clips, so the student can look at that information and then come back to the assessment and complete their assessment. But again, it will prevent them from navigating to any other resource. You can see I have an open response question here. And then once I've completed my assessment, I simply click finish. The only difference between a LockDown Browser enabled assessment versus one that takes advantage of Monitor is that once you launch the assessment, you see the icon that says it's recording for Monitor, and also my webcam is flashing green. Outside of that, it feels very much like a LockDown Browser enabled assessment to the student. Are there any questions for me on either application?
I think I'm pretty good. Natasha, did you have anything there?
No, I think I'm good too. It looks good.
Okay, so it is a really easy application to use. And let me just close a couple of windows. Now, a couple of things that I do want to make mention of as well. I know we talked a little bit about some of the administrative pieces the other day, so I do want to walk you through a couple of pieces I think that might be of interest to you. And this is information that you'd have access to during the trial as well. But when I log in to my admin panel here, if you do decide to move forward with a trial, every institution has access to their own admin panel. So this is where you're going to be accessing all the documentation, setting up the server profiles. Very, very simple to use, very, very simple to add the requirements and create the profiles. But I did want to just make sure I mentioned that with Monitor directly below, the settings will allow you to customize any of the language that you might want to alter inside that student or inside that instructor environment. And certainly you can lock up any of these settings. So if you have program requirements that you want every single instructor to follow, just in terms of how they might communicate instructions or showing an ID or environment check, all that information again can be edited here and those settings can be saved. Inside that program dialog box, when you are explaining what Monitor is to your instructors, that can also be changed. One piece that I also want to make sure I cover, which I think for me is very important, when you're walking through either the trial or if you decide to move forward with the license, every institution has access to reporting for Monitor, so it's very easy for you to determine what type of activity you have for the courses, and it's really simple to go back and audit anybody that might be participating in the pilot because you'll be able to see the courses, you'll be able to see the instructors that are using it, you'll be able to touch base with them and really see what is the experience like and ask any questions that you might like to have. This is an excellent forecasting tool because it will tell you the number of seats that are used and which courses and which faculty are using it as well. I'm limited with how much I can show you because on our side, we don't have access to any student information or course information. This is all, basically for me, I can tell you numbers, but on your side, you'll be able to see which courses, which students, which seats, so on and so forth. Are there any other questions for me that I can answer for you?
I think I'm okay, yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're very welcome. Now, in terms of LockDown Browser and Monitor, and just sort of wrapping up, really the goal for LockDown Browser and Monitor were to add security to your online assessments and to help you to maintain the integrity of the exam content. As you can see, when students are using the application, they can't engage in the standard type of exploits that your faculty might be accustomed to, so concerns about copying, printing, or pasting content. It will, by default, especially when you check that box that requires a student complete the assessment before they leave, it's going to increase your completion rates by default. And the goal is really to build that instructor level confidence with the online testing. In terms of the way the application works on the backside, with Respondus Monitor, again, it's sort of maintaining the integrity of application or assessments that are now given in that truly remote environment, and also giving some more flexibility back to both instructors and students. It's very simple to implement and use, and it is a very cost-effective and scalable solution. The licensing models are a little bit different just in terms of how it works, because LockDown Browser is the first level license, and that's something that is licensed campus-wide. But then Monitor offers you two separate options. You have a tiered license option for the institution, but there's also a student subscription option available to you. So that's something certainly, I know we covered the pricing and the licensing a little bit in our last conversation. I did want to open it up a little bit. Do you have any questions for me on either of those pieces?
I don't believe so. Just to confirm that the pricing was USD price?
It is USD pricing. And I should probably just take you to the website and show you where the pricing can be found. We're very, very consistent with our pricing. So everything is public. Everything is out on our website. We do prorate our licenses based on when an institution might come on board. So in terms of Respondus, LockDown Browser is based on your enrollment. And when you look at the pricing, it is higher ed pricing, and it's found here. And then Monitor pricing, also on our website. And the options are restated here. But if you have any follow-up questions for me on either of those pieces, please let me know.
I'm just taking a look into, so Monitor is the one that encompasses both, right?
Actually, Monitor pricing, so LockDown Browser pricing is first, and then Monitor pricing is in addition to. But you should be aware that with LockDown Browser, you receive 200 free seats of Respondus Monitor. A seat is defined as one student enrolled in one course with unlimited testing in that course.
So the price that we're looking at for LockDown plus Monitor is about $4,000 annually. Sorry, $8,000 annually.
Right. So I'd have to look at what I send out for pricing. Are you the under 2,000 range?
Probably between 2 and 3.
Okay. So in terms of your enrollment, hold on one second. Let me just get back to that page. So are you looking to institution fund only, or is there an option to consider student purchase, or just the tiered model?
Just institution fund.
Okay, so institution funding first year is $39.50, and then LockDown Browser, if you fall within 2,000 to 3,000 students, would be $37.45.
In addition, right?
Correct.
Okay, $37.45. And how does that pricing look in year 2? Is it any different?
So year 2 pricing is specific to usage. So it really would depend on what you're seeing for usage, but for monitor, it's the base level, which is $39.50. And then anything over 1,200 seats is licensed at $1,950 for every additional 1,000 seats.
1,950 per 1,000, so about $2 per seat.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting about, so LockDown browser, there's no change to the pricing. It's institution, it's campus-wide. So this is not going to change LockDown browser at all.
Okay, I got it.
Now, first year pricing is always a little bit less, and that's because you're coming in as a prorate based on when you start the license. Because if you start the, like right now, our licensing term runs August 1 through July 31. If you trial the application, say now or starting in September and October, you'd be looking at a prorate from November to July 31st.
Got it.
Are there any other questions I can answer for you?
In the event that a student does not pass an exam or has to retake it for whatever reason, is the pricing per seat any different?
No, because once the student initiates the seat, that seat, if you're looking at the institution model, that's basically their seat in the course.
Okay.
So it's their seat regardless of how many times they try to take the assessment.
Okay.
And I think we talked about this. Did you have a specific number of times that the student could complete the assessment? Is it maybe 3 times or 4 times?
Yeah, it was 3.
Okay. And just to give you a little bit of background, your scenario is a little bit, I wouldn't call it traditional, but I do have some schools that certainly use it for placement or the types of assessments that you had outlined. But most students, when they take an assessment with monitor, the national average is between 5 and 7 assessments per course. So we factored in just, on our side, roughly how many assessments most courses are giving.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's never a charge. You're never in a situation where there are overages or the same student is being charged twice, if you will.
That makes sense. Okay. I think that's all I have for questions.
Okay. Natasha, did you have any questions for me, or are?
No, I think we're good. Colin and I will go through this with leadership and then get back to you if we do have any questions in the interim.
Sure, absolutely. So if there's anything else you might need, please let me know. I'm going to process the video. I'll send this out to your attention, and I'll send you a link to the trial agreement. And if that's something you want to take a closer look at, if you have any questions, let me know.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time.